We're in season when the hurricanes hit here. And I want to say this, do we increase rates a little bit? Possibly. Look, and you see a storm coming in, you have to be that balance. You have, because you may have not have had a good spring, but we're having a great fall. We see a storm, and that radius of that 8 to 9 hour market pours into the mountain market. So it's good.
Hello, and thank you all for joining us for another episode of Straight Fire VR. Joining us today to take aim at the latest industry chatter and topics are two special guests. We have first Brian Harris, the founder, broker, CEO of Harris Vacation Rentals in Gulf Shores, Alabama, with over 16 years in the industry, and Scott Bunce, Chief Operating Officer for the last 6 years of Cabins for You in Cartersville, Georgia, as well as serving as the Vistage CEO Chair. We're, of course, joined by our co-host, Miriam Ramsey, the Regional Director of Business Development at V-Chips. Miriam is joining us from Destin, Florida today. And of course, here to lead the discussion is Steve Milo. I am the executive producer, Heather Macias. Milo, Steve, I know you have many topics in your sight, so I will let you go ahead and take charge.
I just was curious, Miriam, it looks like you got a little sunburn.
A little bit of sun has been great.
Too much alcohol and too much sun is a bad combination.
My mom told me last night if Rudolph needed to retire, that I'm the girl to lead the sled in December. So we're good, right?
So, we get a little bit of listener feedback, and part of the feedback was to improve my background. So thank you, Heather, for giving me all kinds of tips on how to do that. And the other thing is we've had a lot of great feedback on our Maui podcast, where we talked about the importance of supporting Maui in its rebuilding effort, including having tourists go back to the parts that were not affected by the fire. And I'm happy to see that more and more celebrities, more and more politicians are saying the same thing. It's critical to have tourism, even while there's a portion of the island that's under reconstruction. So glad that message is getting out. And I know Brian and Scott, who are both here, are familiar with hurricanes and natural disasters. So Brian, I just kind of curious, how often are you looking at the weather report right now?
I try not to look at it until there's a storm, right? Like I try to build up all that capacity so that I can really focus on it when there's a storm. I really kind of just try to stay away from it until there is something to look at, and let our team kind of keep that big radar. We also have the luxury of is a meteorologist and worked alongside James Spann in Birmingham, who's kind of a local legend here in Alabama. So he's very prompt on getting us insight into hey, this could be a thing. So that's really handy as well.
And Scott, you don't really have a lot of properties in Cartersville. Actually, you're probably the largest up in the Sevier County, Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, but also your company has also started to diversify in the Panhandle. So how many properties do you have there, and how are you preparing for this fall tropical storm hurricane season?
Well, yeah, so we're actually kind of in 3 markets. And I think the genesis of why we're in 3 markets is the fires. Way back, there was the major fire, but it was only 2 years ago where we had another fire in Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge. So diversifying the markets was part of the main strategy. So now, since we've gone into North Georgia, which is Big Canoe, Blue Ridge, Ellijay, we're now at about 160 properties there. And yes, we are getting into Destin and Panama City Beach, but we have a very small footprint there. We're at about 12, 15 properties right now, looking at a couple of acquisitions along the way. So when a hurricane comes, the first thing we do is we reach out through direct email to past clients that might live in Florida and say, hey, look, come to Higher Ground. We'll offer you a 20% discount. We'll try to make sure there's pet-friendly accommodations, because quite often when people are evacuating, they need to take their pets and everybody else along the way. So it's having a diversified portfolio has its advantages, but that just means there's more risk in different markets depending on the issue.
And Miriam, you've seen firsthand, obviously, the devastating fire in Gatlinburg that Scott just talked about, 2016, which burned up literally 20% of the inventory in that market and caused tourists to kind of stay away from Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge for about a year. But we've also seen during a lot of these tropical storms, hurricanes, that people literally rush to the mountains. So how do you prepare when you start to see the weather and you start to get all the demand coming in last minute?
So we look at it as far as the holiday. So where for us, and as Scott knows, we're in season when the hurricanes hit here. So it's also looking at being in season, looking at rates to make sure. And look, and I want to say this, do we increase rates a little bit? Possibly. Look, if you're in the market that I'm in, you're in season and you see a storm coming in, you have to be that balance, because you may have not have had a good spring, but we're having a great fall. We see a storm, and that radius of that 8 to 9 hour market pours into the mountain market. So it's good for us. I hate it just because we are a company, just as Scott has around the in the panhandle in Florida, but it's good for us for business, and it's something that we have to take a second approach on. Definitely regroup, let check-ins become earlier and see what we can do to help the guest be in a better situation.
And one of the things that Scott mentioned is diversification. And one of the reasons why V-Trip began expanding was partially advocacy diversification, diversifying ourselves out of areas like Flagler County that were just creating incredibly restrictive rental restrictions, and then also the natural disaster. So we found out firsthand last year when Fort Myers was completely taken off the grid how important that is. I mean, we had 400 properties, Scott and Brian, that we had no income for in 2023, and we basically carried all that expense. So I mean, a lot of smaller companies unfortunately couldn't make that, but it is really important to diversify if you can. So one question I had, Brian, in your market, I'm not sure how heavy you are on OTAs, but are you noticing a slipping of VRBO in your market?
I would not say that we're seeing a slipping of VRBO. We actually stopped using Airbnb probably about 18 months ago, 20 months ago. But no, I would say that VRBO HomeAway is still a good platform for us, especially as we launch a property. Now we have great retention, on the guest side. So we have a lot of repeat guests. We look at that as, we want to launch a property. Not that we have plans to take it off of an OTA, but, whereas we may have, 70, 80, 90% bookings come from an OTA the first year the property launches, we're looking to scale that back and get that more balanced, as we go. But no, I have not, heard our marketing team or seen myself slipping of VRBO.
Well, we have. I'm curious to hear Scott's feedback. So we've been looking at the numbers pretty carefully, and VRBO is off a good 30% year over year. And I'm just curious, because I'm going to be talking to an analyst tomorrow about this, if part of this is this revamp of Expedia. So I'm kind of trying to pick up a lot of data here, but it seems like VRBO has cut back on their PPC spend, which would obviously potentially reduce the amount of demand that they're pushing into different listings. But one of the things they're also trying to do is to build the Expedia channel up. Now, this has been something that they've been talking about for the last 8 years. When they purchased VRBO, Expedia purchased VRBO, they were going to consolidate their inventory and create something like similar to Booking.com in Europe, which is an extremely powerful company. So we've definitely seen a slippage. I mean, we talk about it internally all the time.
Well, yes, we have seen a drop in VRBO, but we haven't wrapped our brain around, is the drop due to just what Steve said? Is the drop due to a difference in demand? Or could the drop well be that there are more people, more rentals on the market in general? And you know, it can only go so far spread out with people self-renting and more people being on the platform, that the growth of number of units on platform probably cannot keep up with the demand. So yeah, who knows, but the combination of the three has caused a drop in VRBO.
No, I agree. And I also think for the Gatlinburg, Tennessee market, it's a difference of who's coming now. Like, I'm really big on the thought of VRBO is for the older generation, especially for that market where the younger generation now book off Airbnb. You know, that's a scalable thing. So hit those 3 points with the fourth, that could be a lot on the VRBO droppage as well.
Yeah, so I've got a little bit of data here. Again, this is based on 30 markets, and this is for third quarter, which would be just July and August. So we've seen a 28% reduction in HomeAway for OTA. So basically, and I'm sure Scott's company is much bigger, and same with Brian, but we ended the third, or we're so far trending on the third quarter of being at 61% direct. So that means 39% of our business is quote unquote OTA, and HomeAway would be 38%, and that's down from 52% the year before. Google, if we count it as an OTA, would be at 23%. Booking.com, and this is a company we're going to talk about next episode, 11%, which is remarkable. That's up from 6%. Airbnb, 17%, up from 13%. And another one that's very interesting, Expedia, 8%, up from 4%. So we're seeing share shift. I'm also getting a lot of emails about One Key, which is the loyalty program created by Expedia. I have a suspicion that they are really trying hard to pivot more of their listings and more of their marketing into Expedia to create a channel like VRBO, and it's somewhat related to the valuation of their stock, which right now their multiple is much lower than Airbnb and Booking, and so the Expedia stock is trading at a much lower multiple, and I think what they're trying to do is create a company that's more like Booking.com. But we'll see how things go, and we're going to be talking about that next episode with an expert in the financial sector. But I want to ask Brian, how are your fall and first quarter bookings looking?
So we're seeing a really nice fall, which is it's odd for this year. Let's say that. We were underperforming. Our whole market underperformed in the spring. We got really aggressive, let's call it February, March, because we were seeing, a lighter booking spring. And I think that aggressiveness with the rates helped us fill the summer and helped us fill this backside of the year. I think a lot of the people in our market kind of like, they get through the summer and they're like, all right, we're done. And we really feel like we separate ourselves from our management competition because we're able to grab so much revenue out of the fall, especially the fall. September, October really is a great season for us. The weather's perfect. We're starting to see a lot of fall break trends in the school systems, which is very helpful for us. And then you've got November, December, you've got the holidays. We're actually moving away as a company from the snowbird market. We're not really advertising a lot of monthly rates. We'll take an extended stay, but it's an extended stay at a nightly rate instead of a monthly rate. And the snowbirds in our market are, have always traditionally been a big, January, February, right? So we actually see lower occupancy compared to the market, but higher revenue. Because we've kind of shifted us.
So Scott, we're seeing the same thing. We saw weakness in the spring and summer. We think some of it, unfortunately, is school calendar related, where because of loss of learning, even the Midwest northern schools are starting to compress their summer breaks, which means You don't have as many weeks off. And late August is typically not great. Even the first 2 weeks of June is not as good. But I'm curious, obviously October is a huge month in the Sevier County region. What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, so we felt the pain in the first quarter and the second quarter. You're right, about mid-June is when it picked up. But thank God it did pick up very well between June and July. Tremendous. Early August, yeah, that's pretty good. And then we are having a great October. So really excited about how that is filled in. And of course, if you can fill in early, then you can raise your rate and maximize the balance of the occupancy yet to come. So we're excited about that. I tend at this time of the year not to get too excited about first quarter of next year. Even if our numbers were up, it would be okay. We got a small amount of business, and it might be a small amount above the year before or below. It's just too early to tell. So I wouldn't even share how we're doing because it just doesn't matter. It's just too far out for us.
And Scott, I would second that. And right now we're looking at what does the summer look like for 24? Because a lot of our properties are these what I call mega homes, like vacation specific, 8-bedroom, 10-bedroom, 4 families, 5 families together, and those are booking up, a year in advance. So we're looking at, okay, how are those booking right now? How much revenue do those have? That's where our focus is. The first quarter of the year is just such a small, probably Scott, like you, just such a small amount of the total revenue that we're mainly focusing at the second, third quarter. How's that summer booking right now?
Well, I want to talk about something that Scott hit on, and the reason why I wanted both of you on is the reports of inventory increase in the various markets and how that has been part of the reason why we've seen occupied nights and ADR reduced. And I think it's an interesting conversation because I'm more knowledgeable about the Gatlinburg Pigeon Forge market because I'm actually doing development up there. But there's not a lot of inventory available even today in the core, right? So even if you go to the MLS, you're not going to find a lot of inventory. And I suspect that's similar, but I'll wait for Brian to answer it in the core markets of Gulf Shore and Orange Beach. But it's this stuff on the fringe, these outer rings that investors were buying, particularly in late 2021 and 2022, where they were buying this inventory kind of on the fringe, and it created this quote unquote a lot of supply. I'm just kind of curious, Brian, what did you see in your market?
So we've definitely seen a lot of short-term rentals come onto the market, right? It's become a known asset class. Like we were in Austin because this has become a known asset class, and there's a lot more people involved in it. It's becoming a household thing, right? Like my parents started back in '83, putting classified ads in the paper. You just didn't rent your cottage right at the beach. And so we've seen over that 40 years, as a family being in the business, it changed substantially. So yes, there's been a huge compression these last couple of years. COVID had a lot to do with it. Low interest rates had a lot to do with it. What we see is, if you're classing out the properties, let's say you've got A class properties, B class properties, C class, and D class. The lower the class, the more impact or the more loss you're going to have quicker, right? Like a D property is going to fill that loss because the demand. If you've got enough demand, everything fills. But the first to not fill is the D. And then the second to not fill is the C, right? So I've got owners that have C-class properties, and they're like, hey, why are we off? And I was like, hey, you remember when I told you 12 months ago, right? Like, you're trying to sell it, let's lower the price so we can sell it with good numbers because bad numbers are coming. Like, that's what we're seeing. And that specific instance was a C-class property. And it's like, hey, I knew this was coming. And it's played out exactly how I thought it was going to. Just because that pocket of demand is going to gobble up the A's And then what's left, the Bs, right? If you've got enough demand, everything fills. But as you shrink the demand, the Ds and the Cs, slip faster, quicker.
Scott, so I'm curious, what is your thought on that? Because we're obviously in that same market, that Sevier County, and I'm just curious. I have some assumptions, but I want to hear what you think about this inventory that was bought outside the core.
Yeah, so I'm going to frame up the issue a little differently. So we've had churn, right? We have owners that are seeing real estate at the top of the market. They want to sell, and God bless them, they've got tremendous returns. Those that sold at the top of the market. Obviously, the market's turning with the rising of interest rates and the demand drop. I mean, and now we've got owners that bought at the top that are frustrated and are, it could be leading to part of the churn as well. But when I look at some of our occupancy percentage, I know we're being affected. If we've had properties on program, we're a 20-plus-year-old company. And if they've been on program for a long period of time, they've got the benefit of the repeat bookers, people that fall in love with their properties and the whole bit. So if we have properties that are selling and then we're out recruiting new properties along the way, we have new inventory that doesn't have that same amount of repeat effect. So it's taking us a while to build that up. So that's part of the demand picture for us. In a perfect world, we would have just kept those properties that didn't sell. They would have had the repeat bookings and we would just be blowing everybody out of the market. But we have the opportunity for these new owners that are coming on that have to start to build their occupancy from scratch to really make the big difference for them. And it takes some time.
So Miriam, you've experienced the same thing, obviously, in that Sevier County market. 2019, the average resale was $250 a square foot. By 2022, 2023, it's closer to $400 to $450 a square foot. So you had owners that were just cashing in. And then other owners who were buying had different expectations. What were you telling these people? How are you managing the expectations when they literally were paying double what the previous owner had paid?
It's really hard to have that conversation. And I'm sure, and I love what Scott just said, because that is 100% correct, where you are right. The owners who have been with us, or the units that we've had for a long time, have killed it. They may be a C, D unit, right? But they have that longevity and that repeat guest. But to go to Steve's thing, listen, I did not let a homeowner purchase that had been with me for years, did not buy in this upscale market, because right now we're having the conversations where folks cannot afford their mortgages. I mean, I have an owner right now who is a surgeon who, is a chief of surgery in Minnesota, and his unit is not going to make the monthly average that it needs to pay his bills. I mean, the conversation, and actually I sent him the email that when he sent me the unit, I looked it up and saw the price. I said, guy, this don't pencil. He bought this house, and now what do you do? I mean, he's going to lose it, or he's going to have to keep pouring money into it. But when you purchase and you can't afford it, like, everybody, I tell this, let's go back to COVID. If COVID ever hit again, or we had something like that, if you can't pay your mortgage and not take it out of your pocket for 3 months, do not purchase this property. Having that conversation and having that one-on-one, look, I have owners who have been with me for 12 to 15 years that love that feedback. But a new owner, they don't really understand that, because they're like, do they want a property? But it's the churn of what we're seeing in different markets, where if you overpay and you have this flux of mortgage rates, what do you do?
I think what Brian said also, and we have a similar metrics, is, class of property, A, B, C. I mean, if you have an A property, it almost rents itself. If you have a C property and you bought it at the top of the market, you've got problems. And Scott, I'm curious, because you've got some of the best inventory in Sevier County with heated pools and indoor pools and things like that. Are those properties being affected, or which properties are you having a harder time in this current environment?
It depends on what you define as a hard time. As Brian was talking about, You get somebody who buys at the top of the market, whether they have a pool or not, they're just not going to recoup on their investment. And you're absolutely right that we have a larger inventory of properties with pools. Before COVID, during COVID, after COVID, pool properties have a premium. But let's face it, pool properties come with challenges, right? There's humidity, there's things that break down in a pool property that are harder to maintain than a normal property. So it comes with higher demand, but it comes with some expenses as well.
I would second what Miriam was saying, and I've had conversations with prospective clients that are looking to buy the property, and we'll do a projection, and the guy said, this doesn't make sense. Like, I need it to make not 80 but 120. And I got out my pen and I said, okay, like, you just tell me which number to change it to, right? Like, and I did it kind of tongue in cheek, but it's like, hey, like, this is what we think it's going to do, right? If it doesn't make sense as an investment with that number, then it's probably not a good investment, right? But, I'm not going to just make up a number. And I used to say to realtors and people in the market, like, hey, call us if you need rental projections. And I don't say that now. I say, call us if you want accurate rental projections, because what we've seen in our market is management companies, right? Like, some are nationally branded. They'll just throw whatever number out there, and it's not realistic at all. And we can, and they're saying, well, why is your number so much lower? And it's like, well, because we feel like it's accurate. And I think that's just, part of where the market is, and part of the craze, right, of, all this money, sloshing around.
Miriam, that's shocking. Are you finding that in your market, that some competitors are just making outrageous price estimates?
Just a little bit. I mean, we have it, we're realtors. I won't even give a realtor a projection for his listing. Just because they want that number inflated. So if we do it, they're going to say, hey, I'm going to say she's going to do 60 grand. Well, realistically, when it hits that MLS, it's going to say 90, and Jackson Mountain Homes is sponsoring this. So for me, it's like, okay, this unit's never going to do that. But I mean, they do it all the time. It drives me insane.
Boy, that's something the Tennessee real estate
It's
market.
a hot button for Miriam there.
It really is. I get real mad. They don't even call now. They're like, nope, we're not doing that, because she will call us.
And we'll move on to the next topic. But I mean, to me, I think there was also this idea that you could just buy any vacation rental and it would just create cash flow. And I went back and forth with a developer in Texas, and this developer was putting in really nice properties, but he refused to allow anyone to put in a private pool. And his reason was, we have a common area pool. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. But I mean, honestly, now, as demand starts to slow down, the properties that do have private heated pools, that were built in a way which are, quote unquote, purpose built, optimized for occupancy, living space, whatever, they're going to outperform the market. And as Brian called them, C category, D category, whatever you want to call it, those are the ones that are going to struggle. So, we're going to watch this, but I do think, there's going to be some ramifications for those who bought at the top of the market properties that definitely are going to have struggles with occupancy and ADR. But, one of the questions I had for Scott and Brian, and I'll start with Brian first, is owner acquisition. So we all, are in the business where we lose properties normally for real estate sales. And then, what we try to do is replace quality properties back. Brian, I'm just kind of curious as to how your company's been doing, because we've been in several markets that you're in, and we're seeing kind of an unprecedented amount of owner churn right now.
We're not seeing churn as in we feel like we're going to lose property owners, but we're seeing a lot of people wanting to have those conversations. If that's what you're talking about, yes, we're seeing the same thing. And I think it's a lot of different flavors. I think it's, people that bought, new, last couple of years, unsatisfied with what they're getting. I think it's people that were, inherited, right, because of a big purchase, maybe inherited a new company, and they're not happy with the new company. We see a lot of that. We see people that are just tired of doing it themselves. It's become more and more difficult. So we're seeing a lot. We always call this like after the summer season, right? Like that's when, the owner acquisition season really kicks off, so kind of after Labor Day. We saw a little bit of flurry of activity right before Labor Day. It settled down for a couple of weeks. We're all kind of scratching our heads, and then now it's just, full force. We're getting lots of inquiries, lots of conversations.
So Brian, in your company, do you have a budget or a forecast of how many owners or revenue per new unit you're going to bring in versus whatever leaves? How do you kind of set expectations?
We have, a 10-year and a 3-year growth plan, right? So we know to hit those growth numbers, we've got to get, this many conversations, this many, new owners. We also, kind of budget for, hey, we may have, some that leave us. We may have some that we just have to prune from the program for whatever reason. Because not every, property, not every owner relationship is, perfect. So we definitely account for both of those. We also look at, what target property are we going after? What do we want on the program? We get very specific because we're really pushing our brand to a luxury point in the market. So we know, this is a property that we may not want on the program because we are pushing that luxury brand. So we're very specific about what we want.
How does that conversation go? So when you are pruning, and I mean, you can do it two ways. Is it a prune of a difficult owner not wanting to do whatever, they may have that luxury property, right? But is the churn worth, the profit at the end?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have that both ways, right? I have units that do very good, but I mean, I'm on vacation and I've taken 20 calls every day. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
And then what do? Do you keep that, or do you prune that off, once you bring on X in?
Well, we always look at it as, I look at my first, client is almost my employees, right? Like we're, I've never met a vacation property owner that says my market's great and we have tons of great employees. We just put out a sign and we are flooded with quality people, right? Like that, nobody says that. So one of the things that we've tried to do is really be the sought after management company to work for, and we, that's compensation, that's, bonus structures and team, team aspects, like all that works together. But part of that is like we mandate that we have a reasonable, respectful relationship with an owner.
Mhm.
So if an owner is not going to be reasonable and respectful to my people, then that's going to be something that we have to address and talk about. It's, they're hard in different ways. Like there are hard conversations where it's a great property, it produces a ton of revenue, but I may lose some people because I've got this owner, right? Like that's a hard conversation. There's another hard conversation where the owner's great, right? But the property is just not where we're trying to take the brand, right? And those are also very difficult because it's like, hey, I like you. This is not about you. This is just about your property is just not where we're trying to be, in the next 4 or 5 years. So they're never easy. And sometimes you can have what we call yellow list conversations where it's like, Steve may need to, put a new roof on and, change the decks on the deck boards, right? Like if we can get those two things to happen, like this is a great property, but we've had, somebody get injured on the deck boards and we're having leaks and, but if we can have that conversation and get those capital improvements done, everything's good. But if they're like, no, we're going to wait another 3 years, well, that doesn't work for our brand.
So Scott, I'm going to assume you agree that unit count is the most insignificant number in the industry, that it's revenue per unit. But I'm curious what you're seeing at Cabins for You and the other divisions as you head into the fall right now.
Yeah, no, just like Brian said, it's acquisition time right now. People have gone through the summer. they're either walking away with a good experience, bad experience, and if it didn't meet their expectation, quite often it's the real estate agent that set the expectation. It wasn't our projection; it was the real estate agent that set a projection. They're switching, and it's the gratifying thing now is we're seeing former owners that were lured to another company come back to us, and there's it's one thing celebrating a new property coming on board, but it is twice the feeling if you've got somebody that was led down the path, the grass is greener on the other side. Oh, well, maybe not. And then they come back to us. That's our big win right along the way.
Yeah, so we're seeing the same thing. We actually created a budget for properties and revenue that we expected to hit for 2023, and we're running about 50% ahead. And part of that is we didn't overpromise back in 22, and we lost some owners, but we're getting some of them back. And then some other companies in our areas are just imploding, right? So part of the implosion would be they lost key people. They may have lost key people in season. And the other one, which I'm curious, Brian, if you've heard of, take rate. Some of these owners are really upset that these companies are taking too much out of the pie. And, I think that's created some bad blood between owners who feel like they got burned. So what have you heard from owners as they talk to you about moving away? Because I know part of the owner churn in your market is also there's been companies like Kaiser and Meyer that were ended up purchased by Vacasa. And I know people are having different opinions of their experience working with Vacasa.
Yeah, and I think it's a education that we put a lot of effort into, educating the owner that anything that comes between them and their deposit, right, is in essence an owner, management fee. And a lot of companies will come in and say, okay, I'll do it for, lower than the market, but then they're tacking on a very substantial, 13, 16% guest booking fee. And the owner's coming back at us. It's like, oh, that's a guest fee. It doesn't bother me. And, so we have to educate. And it's like, okay, well, let's say the tax rate on a property. One property is the tax rate's 10%. One property, the tax rate's 80%, right? They both book a $10,000 reservation, but 80% of this 10,000 goes to the city, and you're left with two, and then only 1,000 on this one. Like, is that meaningful? And of course it is. It's like, well, wait a minute, that can't be meaningful because it's a lodging tax, right? But with that example, it kind of helps them understand, like, anything that gets in between me and that deposit is a meaningful, fee, whether it's a tax, whether it's a guest fee, whether it's a management commission, so that's a constant education that we've got.
Scott, in your area, are you seeing the same thing? Are you seeing owners that are coming to you after being burned, either by misrepresentation of income or by a company taking too much of a take rate?
Yeah, certainly the first, right? They were promised the moon, and that revenue didn't materialize. And maybe like Brian is saying, is one thing we do, and every market is different, and we're operating in 3 markets. We look at the fees and we compare it to our main competitors. We even compare it to the OTAs. And interestingly enough, we're seeing competition going up and down on their fees, and we're trying to adjust in real time to make sure that we aren't falling outside of a norm. We don't want to miss out on opportunity. If the competitive set is charging higher fees, we're going to try to catch that up. But on the other hand, we don't want to be so far out of the water that an owner can come back to us and say, now, you're charging more than other people that are courting me. So finding that nice balance and dance is really important.
Yeah, I agree. It's a tricky dance, right? Because we are trying to use things like OR logic to kind of modify some of the fees where the impact of the fee during off season or shoulder season would be less, and during high season more, because as a percentage of the overall rent, it's still less. It is a competitive situation. The tricky part of that is we can make OrLogic work on our website. We can't with the OTAs. So most of the OTAs can only support static fees, which creates its own set of complications. So Miriam, do you have anything to add about some of this competition for owners and some of the opportunities? I know in Destin, you probably talked to the Southern team. They're having a lot of success right now because of some of the owner churn of some of the competitors in that area.
No, they are. And I think it goes back to education. Having a product and being able to sell it and educating not only the owners, but the churn with the owners. Southern does a great job with that, getting out ahead. I mean, the Gatlinburg office, we wrote this, I send out weekly emails to my owners where, hey, this is what is happening. Having that educational resource and providing it and looking at what competitors are doing, what we're really seeing, and Scott was great with saying, is watching other competitors do this. But when they start splitting everything into one fee, like that is where it's hard to see. I mean, look, we know now they're not only putting the rent, they're putting any other fee, housekeeping or whatever, and then the taxes there. So people are getting smarter, and with what we're trying to roll out, again, it's all educational based. So we'll see.
Well, I appreciate having everybody on. And I think it's a good time if you're opportunistic and you're running a good, clean operation. And I would suggest very carefully that you do what Brian has said, that you prune at the bottom. We talked last episode about getting rid of some of this ill brought on hotel-like inventory, studio apartments that were just bad, and focus on, revenue as opposed to just pure unit count, because that revenue is what makes everybody money, makes your owner money, makes the property management money. Those little studio apartments don't really make much. Plus, they tend to have some of the worst guest satisfaction scores. So you can actually improve your guest satisfaction score and your revenue by cutting loose that fringe inventory. But I'd like to thank everyone for being on Straight Fire VR. And we're available for comments, straightfirevr@gmail.com, or our website, Straight Fire VR. Thank you again.